He stood up in a room full of the most powerful men in baseball and told them the truth. They ignored him. For 9 years, his own numbers quietly fell apart while the players around him grew bigger, faster, richer. Nobody believed him. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody said thank you. Then, years later, an official investigation confirmed every single word he had said in that room. By then, his career was already over, and almost nobody remembered his name. This is the story of the man baseball chose not to hear. Ricky Allen Helling was born in 1970. He grew up playing every sport, but baseball was not his first passion. He studied at Lakota High School for 3 years, then completed his schooling at Shanley High School in Fargo. Teachers still remember a quiet student full of competitive spirit. His family had no illustrious baseball tradition, nor did any scout ever come looking at his family's farm. Instead, what he possessed was a stubborn kind of determination, a physique ideal for football, and a land still too small to notice his talent. But everything was about to change, not because of baseball, but because of a summer tournament that no one outside the state of North Dakota had ever heard of. By the summer of 1989, Helling had a full scholarship waiting for him. Football, not baseball. A linebacker position at the University of North Dakota, a dream he had chased his entire childhood. Then the Fargo Post, 2 American Legion baseball team, went on an unlikely run nobody had expected, all the way to the American Legion World Series. Helling missed almost the entire football training camp because of it. 2-a-day practices came and went without him. When he finally arrived in Grand Forks, the football coaching staff had already made their decision. He would sit out the season entirely, a redshirt freshman who barely played the sport he loved most. The bench in Grand Forks would quietly end his football story, but the pitcher's mound in that same summer tournament had already opened a door he had never planned to walk through. After 1 semester at North Dakota, Helling transferred to Kishwaukee. In 1990, the New York Mets selected him in the 50th round of the player draft, a ranking so low it could hardly be considered a true vote of confidence. He did not sign a contract. Instead, he continued playing as a pitcher. His performance at Kishwaukee brought him something almost no one expected, a scholarship to Stanford University, home to one of the most prestigious baseball programs in the country. In his single season wearing the Stanford uniform, he led the entire team in wins and in strikeouts. That same year, he was chosen to represent his country at the Olympic Games in Barcelona, a games where baseball was still only a demonstration sport. The United States team won the bronze medal. 3 years earlier, his name had still been sitting at the bottom of the draft list. Now, he had graduated from Stanford with a degree in economics and was selected by the Texas Rangers in the very first round of the 1992 draft, becoming the 22nd player named overall. Helling made his debut wearing the Texas Rangers uniform in April of 1994. His beginning was nothing like a fairy tale. He struggled, adjusted himself, and gradually settled into the role that would define his career for more than a decade, a durable, unglamorous starting pitcher, always ready to take the ball. In August of 1996, while playing for the Rangers' top minor league team, he threw a perfect game, retiring every opposing batter without allowing a single hit, walk, or defensive error. A few days later, he learned he had been traded to the Florida Marlins, which meant that the finest performance of his career meant almost nothing to the very team that had just watched him play it. The following year, Florida traded him back to Texas right in the middle of the season. That timing meant he was no longer with the Marlins when they won the World Series that October. Even so, his former teammates still gave him a championship ring. It was a strange kind of honor, a reward for half a season of contribution to a team he had already left, proof that even in a sport obsessed with statistics, some things are still decided by loyalty rather than cold numbers. 1998 was the best season of his career. Helling won 20 games that year, tying for the American League lead with 2 future Hall of Famers, Roger Clemens and David Cone. He became only the 3rd pitcher in Texas Rangers history to reach 20 wins in a season, joining a very short list. No Rangers pitcher would match the feat again for more than a decade. He won 5 straight road starts that season, a franchise record that stood untouched for 11 years, longer than his own career would ultimately last. By every visible public measure, he had finally arrived. He was one of the best pitchers in his league, at the exact moment when the entire sport was riding a wave of record home runs and record ticket sales. But something else was happening around him that year. Players were arriving at spring training 30 pounds heavier than they had left the previous season. Fastballs were gaining speed that had no obvious explanation. Home runs were flying out of ballparks at a pace nobody in the sport's history had ever seen. Helling noticed. His own best season would become the backdrop for the moment that truly defined his career, one that had nothing to do with wins or losses. That winter, the Players Association gathered for its annual meeting in Nashville. Helling attended as the Texas Rangers player representative. He stood up anyway. "There is this problem with steroids," he told them. "It is happening, it is real, and it is so prevalent that guys who are not doing it are feeling pressure to do it because they are falling behind. It is not a level playing field. We have got to figure out a way to address it." The room did not erupt. A handful of executive board members nodded politely, and the meeting moved on to other business. Helling kept talking anyway, describing exactly what he had seen with his own eyes on the field. When you see guys coming into spring training camp 30 pounds heavier than they ended the previous season, or they had gained 4 or 5 miles an hour on their fastball, those things are not normal, he said. What bothered him most was not the cheating itself, but what it did to honest players. What really bothered me was there were plenty of good guys, good people, who were feeling the pressure to cheat because it had become so prevalent, he later explained. David Cohn, who had shared the league lead in wins with him that very season, remembered the moment clearly. He was the first guy who had the guts to stand up at a union meeting and say that in front of everybody and put pressure on it, Cohn said. The guts were there. The result was not. The union did not want to be seen policing its members, especially not during a period when record salaries and record attendance were making everyone, players and owners alike, extraordinarily wealthy. Team executives had little incentive to ask questions about players who were suddenly hitting the ball farther than ever before. And the league office, still recovering from a bitter players' strike a few years earlier, had no appetite for another public fight. The silence was not an accident. It was a choice made by almost everyone in the room. Barely days after Helling's warning, at those same Nashville meetings, 2 medical advisors connected to the sport delivered a presentation to league officials and team doctors on the potential benefits of the very substance he had just condemned. One general manager who witnessed the presentation later admitted he was stunned such a talk had been allowed to happen at all. There was, quite literally, one voice in the room saying the game was breaking, and a competing voice in the very same building suggesting there was nothing to worry about. Helling was not naive about what he was up against. He understood that fixing the problem meant testing players, and testing meant trust, arbitration, negotiation, none of which moved quickly inside a labor union built to protect its members first. He was not trying to punish anyone. He was trying to protect the players who refused to cheat, quietly falling behind because of it. Nobody built him a stage for that argument. He simply kept showing up, year after year, and making it anyway. 4 winter meetings. 4 times, Helling stood up and repeated a version of the same warning. 4 times the room listened politely and moved on to other business. On the field, his own numbers told a strange story during those same years. He led the entire league in home runs allowed in 1999. He broke a franchise record for doubles allowed in 2000, then broke his own new record the very next season. In 2001, he led all of baseball in hits allowed, earned runs allowed, and home runs allowed. And yet he kept pitching more innings than almost anyone else in the sport, a workhorse absorbing damage that other pitchers around him, mysteriously, were somehow able to avoid inning after inning. By 2002, Helling was no longer a 20-game winner. He signed a modest 1-year contract with the Arizona Diamondbacks, then moved on to the Baltimore Orioles the following season, only to be released partway through that year. Most careers end quietly around a moment like this. Instead, Florida Marlins signed him back and asked him to do something he had rarely done, pitch out of the bullpen. He accepted without complaint. The results surprised everyone, including him. He allowed almost nothing across his relief appearances that season, and when the postseason arrived, he won 4 games without a single loss, even while allowing more runs than a pitcher normally would in that role. Wins and losses do not always tell the full story, but sometimes they tell the only story that matters. Florida went on to win the World Series that October. 9 years earlier, he had received a championship ring for a season he had barely played. This time, the ring was different. He had earned every bit of it, standing on the mound in relief, in games that mattered more than almost any others of his career. It was, in its own quiet way, a kind of justice, the sport rewarding him directly for showing up at the exact moment when so much of what he cared about was still being ignored everywhere else. 2004 brought a strange and painful end to his season before it even began. While playing in the minor leagues, a broken bat shattered mid-swing and a piece of it struck and pierced his left arm. He did not pitch in a single game for the entire year. He returned the following year, finishing out his career with 2 quiet, unremarkable seasons in Milwaukee. On a June evening in 2006, in the middle of a game his team was losing badly, Helling produced 1 perfect inning, striking out 3 batters using only 9 pitches, a feat only a small handful of pitchers in the sport's entire history had ever achieved. It was a strange kind of closing image, a small moment of complete perfection buried quietly inside an otherwise lopsided, forgettable defeat. His final major league appearance came that September. 5 months later, he announced his retirement, saying simply that he wanted to spend more time with his family. He walked away from baseball the same way he had played it, without ceremony, without complaint. The following year, an investigation led by former Senator George Mitchell was released to the public. It documented in exhaustive detail exactly what Helling had been describing in that Nashville meeting room nearly a decade earlier. A culture inside the sport where performance-enhancing drugs had quietly become widespread throughout the 1990s. Everything he had said, once dismissed as exaggeration or alarmism, was now printed in plain language inside an official government report. His story resurfaced soon after, told in a book written by a longtime major league manager and a respected baseball journalist, then republished under a title that finally gave him credit in plain language. The man who warned baseball about steroids. He did not seek out the spotlight afterward. When asked about the aftermath years later, he offered a simple, almost understated assessment. Less than 1% of players have tested positive since the drug testing program began, he said, pointing to results rather than taking credit. In 2009, the same union that had once let his warnings pass without action asked him to come back and work for them directly, as a special assistant supporting active players. It was not an apology, but it was the sport finally admitting that the man they had ignored had been standing on solid ground the entire time. There is one more chapter to this story, and it has nothing to do with baseball at all. In 1985, at a summer basketball camp, a 14-year-old boy met another 14-year-old boy he took an instant and lasting dislike to. That boy grew up to become a well-known writer and cultural critic. The other boy was Rick Helling. The writer, Chuck Klosterman, later described that week at camp in a published essay, calling his old rival the single worst person he had ever met, an arrogant, self-centered bully who complained constantly and never let anyone forget how good he was. Klosterman gave him a title that stuck for years, arch enemy. He was not exaggerating for effect. In his own words, he had spent his whole life viewing this man as the antithesis of himself. Then, years later, sitting in a dentist's waiting room, Klosterman opened a magazine and found the same name attached to a very different story. The first player in baseball to stand up and take a stand against performance-enhancing drugs. He had to sit quietly with that realization for a long while. I had to come to the realization that the one person I am on record for hating is probably one of the most important baseball players of the last 40 years, Klosterman later admitted. Despite the fact that his success on the field was very marginal, it is a strange kind of legacy, remembered as a childhood villain, only to be quietly rewritten decades later as one of the more courageous figures of the sport. Helling likely never even knew the essay existed. He was simply too busy being right about something far more important. Today, Helling lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area of Minnesota. He still works with the Players Union in an advisory role, quietly helping the next generation navigate a sport he once tried and failed to warn. On weekends in the fall, he can be found on a high school football field in Minnetonka, coaching the very sport he once loved more than baseball, the one a redshirt season took away from him decades ago. He never became a Hall of Famer. His statistics were ordinary, by his own admission. But somewhere between a small town in North Dakota and a winter meeting room in Nashville, he became something rarer than a great pitcher. A man who told the truth before it was convenient, and kept telling it, year after year, to a room that refused to listen. History eventually caught up to him. Not everyone gets that kind of second verdict. Rick Helling did, and he never once asked for it.